Hi, I'm Treubner-Kent, and I'm a health and lifestyle coach. My company is Design a Healthy Life, and I specialize in all things gluten-free. So celiac disease, non-celiac, gluten sensitivity, as we now refer to it, and that covers anything other than celiac disease, including gluten intolerance. And then in addition to that, other food sensitivities as well. And then I also like to hone in on certain lifestyle and environmental triggers that can also undermine your health because, well, not because, but these are things really in and around the home, and that's really it in a nutshell. It's what I bring to the table and how I work with my clients. And I will share with you that my background, I've actually had a very successful interior design business for a number of years, and while I still do that, it's the health and lifestyle coaching which is really taking precedence at this point because it's what I'm most passionate about. It's how I live my life, and it's where I feel I can make the greatest impact. And so, all that said, I like to refer to this as detoxing your environment both inside and out. And then as far as being gluten-free, I've been on this journey for about 10 years now. It all started with an article that I read in a magazine, and it just really jumped out at me because it just described me and everything that, well, it explained a lot of things, I'll put it that way. And I made an appointment with the gastroenterologist, and I got tested, and the test came back negative. And as far as the doctor was concerned, that was the end of it, but I wasn't satisfied, and I did dig deeper, and eventually went completely gluten-free. And this is actually one of the little myths I'll be talking about today. As far as testing and what can happen. And I also have several food sensitivities, actually more than several. And really about 2 years after being gluten-free, I started to experience a lot of symptoms again. I knew something was up, so I did a food sensitivity panel, and that's when eggs and dairy and a few other things came up for me. And so again, that's all been part of my journey, and I first came to Dr. Weir's office about a little over 2 years ago now. It was recommended that I see a chiropractor, which I had never done before in my life, and I didn't know why that was even necessary, but I did it, and I'm so glad that I did. It's been a huge change in my life. So, and that brings me to where I am today. And so I mentioned earlier, as far as lifestyle and environmental triggers, and one of the biggest ones is actually your diet. And for our purposes here today, that's what we're going to focus on, specifically the gluten-free diet and gluten-free diet and lifestyle. And so this talk, I called it the 5 top gluten-free myths and mistakes. And so the first one I wanted to address is I can eat, this is myth number 1, I can eat all the bread, cookies, pasta, and so forth that I want as long as it's marked gluten-free. And we live in, at this point, we're really so lucky because we have so many products to choose from. 10 years ago, when I started, there was a lot less choice, and on the one hand, maybe that was a good thing. Depends how you look at it. But even 20, 30 years ago, I honestly don't know what people ate. But today, it's gone totally the other way. And we have a big trend now towards eating gluten-free for non-medical reasons. And food manufacturers that got on the bandwagon and There are new products coming on the market every day. There's a lot to choose from and a lot to resist. And I think the issue here really is processed foods, whether you're gluten-free or not, are not that good for you. A gluten-free cookie is still a cookie. I think that's a fun little quote that pretty much sums it up. But at the same time, that doesn't mean giving up all your favorite foods. It's really about moderation. I've been working with a client recently who was diagnosed with celiac disease and dairy sensitivity, and her diet was actually really pretty good already. She ate a lot of fruits and vegetables and quality proteins and whole grains, but she was also relying a fair amount on processed foods and relying on these processed foods, and she also loved to bake. And so that's really what I focused on with her, was transitioning to cutting back a bit on the packaged products and then helping her learn how to bake gluten-free, which is, that's a learning curve in itself for many of us. And so, so she's been doing really well on that. And so that brings us to, what is it about processed foods? What is the problem? And processed foods, they contain a lot of chemicals, preservatives, synthetic ingredients. You're going to have things like genetically modified organisms. That's another big controversy right now that you've likely heard about. They're in most packaged products, unless they're organic. And then we have things like sugar, salt, and fat. These are three ingredients that manufacturers really play with, and we get way more than we need from some of these products. It's why we can't stop at just one cookie, one potato chip. I mean, who eats one potato chip, right? So there's all these little things going on with these foods, and we're really so much better off, especially people like us who we have a sensitivity to certain foods, whether it's just gluten or other foods in addition to gluten. And then especially you need to look out for what else might be in this product. But we're being much kinder to ourselves if we can focus more on the healthier whole foods than these foods that were created in the factory. And I wanted to mention too, this same client, she does also have a corn sensitivity, and she's actually questioned herself whether that has something to do with, she used to eat a lot of corn-based products, and she knows that they weren't necessarily organic, and so that's become a concern for her. Was she eating a lot of these genetically modified foods, and of course, and did that cause the problem? And of course, we don't know the answer to that. It is, like I said, an area of controversy, and but it's also been connected to a lot of health issues that people are having. So, so a couple of other points, and these are on your quiz that you'll find on your chair. So, food is more than just calories and nutrients. Food is information. And when you eat something that doesn't agree with you, your body is getting information that is a red flag, and it's going to react to it. So that's really very simplified what's going on. And then you also want to be aware of these top 6 most common foods, which are may or may not be allergen-free, that are often in processed food products. And just to go down the list that you have there, these are caramel flavoring or coloring, which uses barley malt. Barley is not a gluten-free grain. You have natural or artificial flavors. Hydrolyzed wheat protein is the next one. Lactose, casein, those are both dairy related, and then modified food starch. And that brings us to our next myth, which is the gluten-free diet is too expensive. And there's actually a little bit of truth to this because, well, let's just say there is a little bit of truth to this. However, the products that are the most expensive are the gluten-free foods like the bread, the packaged cookies, the crackers, the pasta. That's where the dollars can really add up. And so just a couple of suggestions for you there, which is, as this client I mentioned earlier, baking your own gluten-free products from scratch. And yes, you can buy a ready-made mix, but you're even better off creating your own mix. There's lots of recipes out there, and so I've worked with a woman who, she's actually very resistant to this because the thing with gluten-free baking, if you're not familiar with the different flours, there's actually so many different types of flours out there, and you can't get by with just one in any, typically you can't, in any baked ingredient. There's multiple flours that need to be incorporated into a mix, and so she was very hesitant to make that investment. But I think that once you do make that initial investment, the bag of flour is going to last you a long time because you're combining it with different flours, and you can end up with a fairly large amount, and it should last you. And so I think that's definitely a way to save money. You can also grind your own flours if you have a really good quality blender like a Vitamix or a Blendtec. I'm not familiar myself with the latter, but I do have a Vitamix, and it's actually really fun to grind your own grains. It takes like 2 seconds and you're done. And of course, if you don't already own a good blender, that's of course another investment initially, but you'd be using it for so much more than just grinding your own flour that I think that's something that can pay off as well long term. And you might find a deal on it. You can certainly shop online for deals, and there's lots of free information and recipes online. And then when shopping for groceries, you can buy in bulk. And a word of caution with that, because buying in bulk can be a source of cross-contamination. I think a lot depends on where you're buying those foods, so you need to trust that the store you're purchasing from is paying extra attention to these things. But I would also ask questions. So if I go to a bulk foods section and the nuts I want to buy are right next to the whole wheat flour, I'm not going to buy it. And some of the concerns that can come up is what was stored in that bin before the nuts were put in it. So, and was it cleaned properly if they changed ingredients? And was it clean? So I think these are questions you need to answer. You need to ask and get some answers, and so that you feel comfortable with what you're buying. And if it doesn't feel right to you, if it doesn't feel safe, then I wouldn't do it. For produce, fresh fruits and vegetables, you can join something like it's called a CSA. It's a community supported agriculture program, and these things are run by a local farm, and they will deliver produce directly to your home, like once a week. I think you often have options on how often and how much, so that's a great idea. And then I also like to refer clients to, there's a group called Environmental Working Group, and or EWG, and they put out lots of lists. They do all this research and they put out lists, and they have one called the Dirty Dozen, and this is looking at the top 12 foods, organically grown, non-organically grown produce, excuse me, so it's conventionally grown, the top 12 that, if at all possible, you want to buy organic. And then they have another list called the Clean 15, and that's the exact opposite. And again, these are conventionally grown foods that are really not a concern. And I think between these two lists, it's a really good guideline, especially if you're not sure about if even buying organic. And I just think that's a good starting place, and focusing on the ones that matter most. And again, it's all part of a process. It's not necessarily about jumping in and doing everything at once. And then another thing I wanted to address as far as the gluten-free diet being too expensive is this whole piece about, especially in the beginning, making mistakes, because that can also cost you, not just in terms of money, but just your health. And so things like eating gluten occasionally. It's one thing if it's accidental and completely unintentional, but it's a very different thing if it is intentional, because it's, well, if you are still eating gluten from time to time, you're not gluten-free. It's really that simple. There's a couple of analogies that I've heard, like you can't be a little bit pregnant, or you can't just like walking into a patch of poison ivy and, well, it was just a little bit. It just, you either are or you aren't sensitive. And if you are sensitive, you just don't want to go there. And along those lines, something that I often do with clients, it depends a little bit on the situation, and again, this is a private client, so depending on the situation and the level that I'm working with them, I will do a store tour. So I have somebody who has a special needs child, little girl's 4 years old, and she was recently put on a gluten-free, dairy-free diet by their naturopath. And so I met the mother at, it's actually PCC, and we went through the store together, and this was really helpful to her, just to have that extra level of support and to know which products were safe to buy and which weren't. Again, in this case with her daughter, there's a lot of issues going on, and so it's really critical that they be super careful. And then one other thing that I give to this is a tool that I give to my private clients, and it's the Redesign Your Interior Workbook. This is just a little guideline to get you started. There's lots of information in here about shopping tips and what foods to eliminate, and I get into testing, and there's quite a bit more. And so that's something that I do sell, and I do have a few copies with me here today. If that's something that interests you, just let me know afterwards. So I think that brings us to myth number 3, which is I got tested for celiac disease and the test came back negative. That means I can still eat gluten. Well, this can really be a minefield. And the short answer is, of course, no, that's not necessarily the case. It depends on a number of different factors, starting with your doctor. You really want to see somebody who's very knowledgeable on testing for not just celiac disease, but the whole spectrum of gluten sensitivity. And then, so that's the first piece, and then which labs this doctor uses can also make a difference. And of course, you're going to be relying on trusting their opinion, and that's fine, but so much can vary even between labs. So there's all these different factors. And I just had, a few days ago, it was a free assessment call with a potential client. This is something I do, getting on the phone with somebody at no charge, and gives them an opportunity to ask some questions. And she had just been tested for celiac disease, and this is exactly what she said. The test came back negative, and so the doctor said, "You're good, you can eat gluten." However, she'd done what we call an elimination diet, and I will explain to you what that is if you're not familiar with it. And she already knew that she felt a lot better if she did not eat gluten. So what was going on? And I basically said to her, not so fast. And she, another thing to keep in mind here, actually, so she was doing an elimination diet, and I don't actually know if she was doing that already when she got tested, because that would also make a difference. That could affect your test results. So that's just another little detail in there. So lots to consider. And as far as the elimination diet, what this is something you can do entirely on your own. It doesn't cost you a thing. And it can be challenging, it can be a bit tricky, but basically there's there's lots of variations of this, and I can certainly steer you in the right direction if this is something that you want to explore. But the good ones, I would say, eliminate the top 3 most inflammatory foods, so that's going to be gluten, sugar, and dairy. And some might also eliminate all grains, or will only allow a very small amount, and there will likely be other foods as well. Typically alcohol and caffeine, those will also be eliminated. And it's typically could be 21 days, 28 days, this varies also. But the key thing is, at the end, when your time is up, you're reintroducing these foods one by one. And you need to allow 3 days in between before you reintroduce another one. And the reason why is that you really need those 3 days to be watching yourself very closely and looking for any symptom whatsoever anywhere in your body. And that will tell you very likely if it's an issue for you or not. And so what kind of symptoms are we talking about? Well, it can be anything from after eating a food, gas, bloating, feeling of fullness, congestion, brain fog, headache, can be on your skin, a rash, itchiness. And it won't necessarily be immediately. It could be a day or two later, even 3 days later, so that's why you need to wait those 3 days. But it does work, and I think bottom line, even without running actual tests, just listening to your body, that's really important. That will tell you a lot. And then as far as testing, I was just going to just very briefly, as far as some of the issues that can come up there, especially if your doctor isn't really familiar with all of this. So gluten is a protein, and there are several parts to this protein. And the one area that is most commonly tested, it's called gliadin. However, even that breaks down even further, so you have different components. And there's only one component that is tested most frequently, that is because it's associated with celiac disease. And even when the lab results come back, they might only say gliadin and not specifying which one. And so that's one thing. And then there's something else called, and I'm only sharing a couple of these because there's a lot more. There's something else called gluten, which is actually a fairly large percentage of the protein in wheat, and that's rarely tested for. So you can see right there, there's some loopholes. And if all they're testing for is celiac disease, then that's not even addressing the very large percentage of people who have what we now refer to as a non-celiac gluten sensitivity. Celiac disease is perhaps 1% of the population, and non-celiac gluten sensitivity is closer to 6 to 20%. So that's a significant amount. And as far as symptoms, which I mentioned briefly, we tend to think of a gluten-related health issue as it's digestive. It has to do with your digestion. You get stomach aches or any number of things. And there's a whole other component that is neurological, and we're hearing more and more about this now. It's become a really big area of research, and this is the piece that really fascinates me because my mother has Alzheimer's disease, and I know that many families have had to deal with this very debilitating illness, and there's a strong correlation now that we're seeing with gluten. And we actually put my mother on a gluten-free diet earlier this year, and she's 89 years old, and it has made a difference. It's not going to bring her memory back, but behaviorally, there's been a noticeable difference. And this is somebody with advanced Alzheimer's at this point. So that's just something I wanted to share, and really any neurological issue, dementia, ADHD, autism. We also know that gluten sensitivity can present as a skin disorder. It's a skin rash. It's called dermatitis herpetiformis. And for some people who have that specific version of celiac disease, that's how it presents. And so there's really any number of ways this could come up. We know that gluten sensitivity is associated with about 300 different conditions throughout the body. And lastly, since this is something else that does come up, and in relation to your skin, so what about toiletries and products that you put on your skin? It's a little bit of controversy in this area. Some people will say, oh, you don't have to worry about that. Personally, I think that is something important to take into consideration and to avoid products that do contain gluten. And I say this from personal experience. I do think it makes a huge difference. And the thing is, we have three pathways. One is ingestion, then you have absorption. So what you put on your skin, it is going to get absorbed. And the third one is inhalation, which isn't really a concern for what we're talking about here. You're much less likely to inhale gluten than to ingest or absorb it. But with inhalation, that's where more of the environmental issues come up. And again, that's something I address with my clients when I'm working with them. And so I think that brings us to myth number 5, which is, I call this the food pyramid fog, food pyramid myth, but food pyramid fog. So what is that? Well, I think we all grew up learning about the food pyramid, and it says you have to eat certain foods, and a healthy diet has to cover all 4 food groups. And 2 of the big ones are grains and dairy. So if you're gluten-free and dairy-free, well, that's 2 major food groups right there. Of course, you can be gluten-free and still be eating other grains, but the focus has always been on wheat. And so much depends really on the individual is what it comes down to. There is no such thing as a one-size-fits-all diet. It just doesn't work because each of us, we're all unique. And even those of us in this room, one person might just be dealing with a gluten sensitivity, another one it's gluten, dairy, maybe eggs, and another person it's going to be something else again. So we are all different. And then there's so many other diets right now that are really popular. So if anybody's heard of the paleo diet, so anybody who's eating paleo, and that's completely grain-free. The focus is on meats and vegetables, quality proteins, and proponents of the paleo diet will say this is the way to eat. And then you have vegan diet or raw foods diet or vegetarian, and you can really make yourself kind of crazy thinking, oh, I should be eating this way or I should do that. And it's I call this the crap cycle. That's actually on your quiz too, and that stands for the cycle of reactivity and panic, because that's often what we do. And really, it comes back to listening to your body, knowing what foods work for you, what you respond best to, and staying away from the others, regardless of, doesn't matter if it's vegan, vegetarian, or what. That's really the bottom line. And this also brings me to the number one secret that I wanted to share with you today, and that's really eliminating any foods that you are sensitive to in order to really heal and reduce the inflammation that is likely going on in your body. And that's, again, that's also on the quiz. So specifically eliminating food sensitivities and reducing inflammation. So I think that additional testing for food sensitivities, if the elimination diet hasn't worked for you, I think that's a really key piece, and it's important. It's, and I've had people say to me, I don't want to know that I'm sensitive to anything else in addition to gluten. This is enough. I don't want to go there. But, and it's kind of funny if you think about it, but really I would encourage you to explore deeper, especially if you know that when you eat eggs you feel sick or whatever it might be. I just wouldn't stop there. And then one other significant piece that ties into this, and really for any of us who, I think the vast majority of us were finding out considerably later in life that, say we're sensitive, extremely sensitive to gluten, or we have celiac disease, and so you've been eating gluten for all those years. I mean, who doesn't grow up eating gluten-containing products unless you knew at a very young age already? And so that's just the reality. And what that means is that the chances of that a certain amount of damage has already been done, there's a good chance of that. So looking more closely at what's going on as far as your digestion. I've had clients who some of their issues are things like osteoporosis, which is actually really common for someone with celiac disease or gluten sensitivity, so poor bone health, and things like leaky gut, which is you might have heard of. It's also known as intestinal permeability, but it just means that there's something deeper going on, and really important, I think it's really important to take a look at that, because if you're not properly digesting and absorbing your nutrients, then that's just going to lead to additional problems. And I don't think we hear about that one quite so much, but it does matter. And Last thing along those same lines, which I touched on very briefly at the beginning, there's a huge popular trend right now to go gluten-free to lose weight. And I actually work with a business coach, and she wanted me to call this talk how to lose 20 pounds really fast or something like that. And I just wasn't comfortable with that because I don't think it's true. I don't think it's just about gluten. That's the thing. Whatever food you are eating that doesn't agree with you, whatever it is that might be going on in you, that's what you need to look at. And then, yeah, you might lose some weight if that's a problem for you, because weight gain in relation to some of these food issues, that's it's a symptom actually. So so I want to mention that because that's my take on this whole weight loss piece, which is totally different from having a medical issue that requires you to not eat gluten. And this brings us to our last myth, which is I can easily do this myself and still eat bread. And again, this the client I mentioned that I had a free assessment call with, and so she'd been tested and it came back negative. And then she had also tried the elimination diet, and she knew from that she felt better. But it was very hit and miss for her, and a huge struggle, and she just couldn't do it. She was just amazed that how can anybody eat that way? and this is where that's such a common reaction. There's a huge emotional component to transitioning to a gluten-free diet or any foods that you are finding you need to just eliminate. Often they seem to be a major food group. They're in everything. Some people, it's a sensitivity to sugar in addition to gluten. Sugar is in everything. Corn is in everything. Eggs are in everything. Dairy is in everything. So whatever it is, it can really be a challenge. And so a lot of what I look at when I like to address, and it's important to address in working one-on-one with a client, is these negative mindsets that can come up, and the whole emotional piece. I call this the emotional crush of giving up the foods you love. And lost my train of thought there. As far as negative mindsets, it's more about focusing on not what you're eliminating, but what you're gaining. If you're feeling better and getting your health back, that's huge. That's what really matters. And so I do want to invite you to schedule a free assessment call with me. I call that a Healthy Life Assessment Call. So it's 30 minutes, and it gives you a chance to ask some questions, and as far as some of your most pressing concerns, and then I can usually leave you with one or two tips, and that's just a great place to start. And just to sum up, it's really a process. There's a lot to learn, a lot to deal with along the way, but it's absolutely doable. And the good news is you can, just by changing your diet, you can really feel a whole lot better. So thank you for being here today, and I hope you enjoy a lovely rest of the evening. Thank you. Okay, so we just had a quick question, and thank you for reminding me about this. I did mean to review the quiz with you and go over the answers. So just to make sure that you do have this information before we leave tonight. So the first question, and these are all fill in the blank for the most part. Food is more than just calories and nutrients. Food is information. The top 6 most common foods are food additives with hidden gluten or other allergens. This is question 2. Are caramel flavoring or coloring, natural or artificial flavors, hydrolyzed wheat protein, lactose, casein, modified food starch. Number 3, baking your own gluten-free breads and treats will not only save you money, but you'll know exactly what is in them. And I'm not sure I actually mentioned that earlier, but I think that's really a key point. You know exactly what's in it and you know exactly what you're eating. That's a big plus. The next question, most tests for celiac disease are only looking at the antibodies for alpha-gliadin. Number 5, gluten sensitivity can present either as a digestive disorder or a neurological disorder. Just a couple more. There are over 300 conditions associated with celiac disease or non-celiac gluten sensitivity. So that was the answer to that one, 300. CRAP, or CRAP, stands for the cycle of reactivity or panic. Number 8, there is no one-size-fits-all diet. True or false? That is true. And lastly, the number 1 secret to feeling better every day is eliminating your food sensitivities and reducing inflammation. So, any questions?